inviting me to speak at this event. I have had the privilege of doing 2 cases connected with Brazil. The first was about 6 years ago when a pharmaceutical company was investing, an Indian pharmaceutical company invested in Brazil. It was pre-Lehman Brothers, and they didn't do as well as expected, and the sale proceeds were then frozen in London and were the subject of a worldwide freezing injunction in London. The second was very recently when a Brazilian company bought an Indian cement company, and it was an LCI arbitration in London when things went wrong. I'm speaking today about third-party funding, and the best place to start is at the beginning, which is the historic roots of third-party funding. There are 2 common law doctrines of maintenance and champerty, which is basically a third party that funds litigation or a proceeding that it is unconnected with, either with the expectation of getting a reward at the end or without the expectation of getting a reward at the end. Both of these doctrines were looked upon as increasing unnecessarily litigation and therefore increasing or promoting frivolous litigation, and were not allowed. Things have moved on greatly since then, and we've seen the advent of arbitration, and arbitration was introduced to be a cost-effective mechanism to resolve disputes between 2 parties. We've learned from Professor Orlando just now that arbitration is actually quite expensive, and it's becoming more and more expensive, especially institutional arbitration. And this is a problem, especially for a party that might have a good case, but does not have the financial means to bring the case in an arbitration against its counterparty. For this purpose, third-party funding is very useful. So it promotes access to justice, which is one of the biggest advantages of third-party funding. The second advantage is that it might be that there is a company or a party that can have access to financial resources to fund its arbitration, but would prefer not to lock up its finances just in that arbitration, and therefore would like to approach a third-party funder in order to risk manage their finances. So these are the 2 main reasons why parties have historically entered into third-party funding. In return, the third-party funder tends to get a share of the proceeds at the end. It is an investment decision for the third-party funder. So it can be best explained as, for example, you have a friend who has a startup company, and the friend asks you to invest in their startup company, and you make a little bit of an investment with the expectation that when the friend sells the company, you will get a reward at the end. Similarly, a third-party funder is investing in the arbitration to hopefully get a reward at the end. The reward tends to be about between 15 and 50%, bordering on 1/3, so 30% generally speaking. The other types of funding which can be distinguished from third-party funding are after the event insurance and conditional fee agreements. After the event insurance is insurance that can be obtained generally by a respondent to protect itself from paying the costs of the other side, of the winning party at the end. And a conditional fee arrangement is when a party goes to a lawyer and says, I cannot, let's say your hourly rate is £100 an hour, for example. I will only pay you about £60 an hour right now because that's all I can afford. However, if I win and if you win the case for me, then I will pay you £40, which will make up your £100, plus another £40. So that's a conditional fee arrangement. And these 2 can be distinguished from a third-party funding arrangement, which is a percentage share of the damages at the end. Now, what will the funder pay for? It's not just the legal costs of the arbitration. It can be negotiated that the funder should also pay for the enforcement costs after the arbitration. It can also be that the third-party funder be made to pay for any adverse costs liabilities in case the party that is obtaining the third-party funding loses and finds itself in the position that it must pay the costs of the winning party. It can also provide security for costs. So for example, if it's the claimant that is obtaining the third-party funding, then it might be faced with an application where the claimant has to put in money to secure the costs in the event that it loses and it has to pay the costs of the other side. So this can also be negotiated into a third-party funding arrangement. It can also pay for insurance premiums if any after the event insurance is obtained. The third-party funder, as I've said previously, would get a percentage share, but there are other variations of the return on investment. So for example, it can be a multiple of what the third-party funder has invested. Let's say they have invested £400,000 into the arbitration. It can be a multiple of 1.5 times, 2 times, 3 times, whatever the agreement might be between the parties. It can also be an assignment. So you can assign to the third-party funder the proceeds of the arbitration. It must be agreed, however, in advance. So to protect your client, you must agree whether this commission is going to be paid out of the gross damages that will be received at the end, or the net damages, which are net of the legal costs and also out-of-pocket expenses. The priority of payments must also be negotiated with the third-party funder. So for example, who is going to be paid first? Is it the lawyers that will be paid first, or the funders who will be paid first? What about experts, if any, and other disbursements? Who will calculate and distribute these proceedings? Is it going to be an external accountant who will calculate the percentages and distribute them, or someone else? And lastly, of course, it makes most sense to agree that no payment is going to be made to the third-party funder without the proceeds actually being received by the claimant or by an escrow account nominated by the claimant. When must a party begin or approach a third-party funder? One might think that it is only at the beginning of the dispute, but actually one can approach a third-party funder at any stage. It can be at the outset, during the arbitration, or even after the award has been pronounced. The factors that a third-party funder will consider before it agrees to disburse the payment and the legal fees will be, firstly, is it a claim for a monetary relief? I mean, if it's just a declaratory relief, it doesn't make sense for a third-party funder to be funding the the arbitration. What are the prospects of success? Is it likely that the party that is seeking this third-party funding will be successful at the end? What is the ability of the other side to actually make payment? So there's no point in the party obtaining third-party funding to be successful only to realize that the other party doesn't have the means to pay the award. What are the terms of the arbitration agreement? What is the institution, if it is an institutional arbitration, that is, whose rules apply? What is the composition of the tribunal? This is quite important as it makes it predictable. What is the seat of the arbitration? And how quickly is it likely to be resolved in that seat of arbitration? Is that seat sort of likely to extend or delay any enforcement or appeal processes, or is it likely to cut it down? The substantive law and the language of third-party funding is also important. Is it a law that is predictable, or is it an unpredictable law? Uniquely, the quality of the claimant's documents and record keeping is also an important part of third-party funding. We've already heard from our first speaker, Edward Jenkins QC, how quality of record keeping is very important in cases of international money laundering. The last and the most important points in relation to third-party funding is the ethical issues. So the first and foremost ethical issue is between the lawyer and the third-party funder. If the lawyer has been appointed by the third-party funder, it is possible that at the back of the lawyer's mind, despite the fact that the lawyer's professional obligations are only to the party and not to the funder, that they might be influenced by the economic power of the third-party funder. It is also useful for the lawyer to state the assumptions on which the lawyer has given the budget and provided timelines that the lawyer is going to invest in this case. Is the third-party funder going to be able to misuse its economic power? For example, is it going to seek to renegotiate at a mature stage in the arbitration the entire agreement of third-party funding? Can the right of termination that the third-party funder has be misused against the client to exert unfair pressure, perhaps to settle the matter? Will the third-party funder interfere in any day-to-day management of the case or in a key strategic decision? It's very important to keep a sort of wall between the lawyer who has the day-to-day management of the case and the third-party funder. In the event of a settlement that a third-party funder might have invested, bearing in mind that it might be 3 years within which this dispute will get resolved. But let's say it's already year 5 and the third-party funder is beginning to get impatient. The lawyer must bear in mind that it's not his professional duty to sort of influence his party to settle the case because he feels that he might be able to get another referral from the third-party funder for a case in the future. So these are ethical issues that must be borne in mind. Then there's of course the security for costs. So if a third-party funding arrangement has been put in place, the opposite party can say this is proof that the party cannot make payment and therefore seeks a security for costs order from the tribunal. This has happened in the case of South American Silver and Bolivia, where Bolivia asked the tribunal for security for costs because they said, given that South American Silver has obtained third-party funding, they must be impecunious. They must be in a position where they cannot afford to make payment of costs and of legal fees, and therefore security for costs must be granted. It was held that that was not the case, and that the fact that third-party funding has been obtained does not mean that that is proof that the party cannot make payment. The only thing that was ordered in this case was to disclose the identity of the third-party funder. This brings me to the next big issue, which is whether or not to disclose the fact that there is a third-party funding arrangement to the other side. In my opinion, it's much better to be transparent and to disclose it to the other side. There is an IBA guideline, the International Bar Association guideline, that says that this must be disclosed. However, it is not set in stone as yet. The last ethical issue is between an arbitrator and a third-party funder. So for example, is the arbitrator a partner of a law firm that has a close relationship with the third-party funder? Have they acted as a counsel for the third-party funder, or are they on the board that advises the third-party funder? I'm being told that we're running out of time, but I promise it's not going to take more than 1 minute. The last is all the jurisdictions that third-party funding arrangement where they have been approved. So England has decided that it's not going to have rules and regulations, and therefore the third-party funders themselves have come together to have a self-regulated code of conduct. Singapore and Hong Kong have taken the route that they will actually regulate third-party funding. This has been passed in Singapore recently. In Hong Kong, the bill is at the second stage of reading. And the Paris Bar Council has adopted a resolution for third-party funding. And with this, I come to an end of my talk. Thank you.
Muito obrigado para o painel aqui. Eu gostaria de convidá-los agora para tomar mais um café. Estamos ganhando o tempo que perdemos inicialmente. E eu vou pedir então que o break seja 5 minutos. E aí a gente volta para o próximo painel, que será um debate entre os ilustres Pedro Batista, Joaquim Muniz, Andrew Burr e Jonathan David. E aqui eu tenho a honra e o privilégio de presidenciar a mesa. Muito obrigado.